hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to this seventh night of the 2024 Rick Steves Festival of Europe. My name is Ben Green, and I'll be your moderator as we explore beautiful and diverse Central Europe. And now I would like to introduce our host. Cameron Hewitt is a guidebook researcher, a former tour guide, and a guidebook co-author who has been exploring and researching in this region, Central Europe, for more than 20 years. So please join me in welcoming Cameron. Hi, Cameron, and happy festival.
Hello, Ben. Thank you so much for having me back here. I'm always happy to be back with all of you virtually, whether it's Monday Night Travel or whether it's this special Festival of Europe we've been doing for the last week. We have a lot of ground to cover. We're going to talk about the wonderful countries of Central Europe. There's 6 countries we're going to try to cover tonight. We have 2 guests joining us live from Europe at 3 o'clock in the morning to tell us about their countries of specialization. So let's just get started right away, and away we go. There won't be a lot of time to linger in too many of these places, but we really want to give you a taste of each one as we travel through Central Europe together. And as Ben said, this is night 7 of our Festival of Europe. Tomorrow's the grand finale. So tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, I will be in Rick's house, along with a lot of our team that lives here and works here in the Seattle area. You're welcome to join us virtually. That'll be a fun way to finish up our festival. All of the ones we've done so far over the last week, about half of them are already available on our website if you missed them, and the others will be up any day now, including this one. But we're going to talk today about Central Europe. I'll talk in a moment about what exactly Central Europe is, but just to give you a little taste, we're talking about these countries sort of just east of the central part of Europe. So for example, the amazing and beautiful cities of Prague in the Czech Republic, Krakow in Poland, Budapest in Hungary, and then some other beautiful, small, charming towns like Český Krumlov in the Czech Republic. Heading south, we're also going to be along some beautiful seashore in Croatia. Lots of beautiful small coastal towns like Rovinj and big coastal towns like Dubrovnik. We'll be stopping off in each of those places. Just north of Croatia, you've got the alpine country of Slovenia with its beautiful Alps. And just east of Croatia, you've got Bosnia-Herzegovina with its Turkish heritage and its Muslim culture. It's a really fascinating place that's really quite close to some of the other places we're going to on this trip today. Lots of unique experiences to be had in Central Europe, including, for example, the great thermal baths of Budapest. But for me, one of the real highlights of traveling in Central Europe, I've been traveling in these countries for more than 25 years. I've been writing our guidebooks here for more than 20 years, are the wonderful people that we get to meet along the way. I love the local people that I meet in each of these countries. It's just a fun place to be and to connect with people. And some of my favorite people in these countries are our outstanding tour guides. We've got a fantastic team of guides that lead our tours here. For example, B here in Poland. We've got Etelka in Hungary. We've got Marian and Barbara in Slovenia. And we have 2 very special guests live calling in from Europe tonight, and that's Péter and Darija. I'd like to introduce each of our guests in turn. Let's start with Péter. Péter, you're dialing in from Budapest, Hungary. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what tours you do, and tell the folks about yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Péter Pölczman, and yes, I live in Budapest, Hungary. And for the last 20 years, I've been leading the Rick Steves tours in what used to be Eastern Europe, but right now, of course, we call it Central Europe.
Great, welcome. Thank you so much. And Darija, tell us about yourself.
Hello from Zagreb, capital of Croatia. And yes, I'm the tour guide since the year 2000 for Rick Steves Europe, about 13, 14 years. I don't even remember correctly. I guide 3 tours, Best of Europe, 2 weeks one from Rome to Paris. And then this one at home, Best of Adriatic. And then Munich, Salzburg, Vienna. So 3 very different ones, but I like it that way. And then I also mix that with the local guiding here in Zagreb.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for getting up early or staying up late, as the case may be, to join us tonight. And to kick things off properly, let's do a little traditional toast. So I think each of us has a drink. I'll go ahead and grab mine here. We've got a little bit of variety from this part of the world. I've got some Becherovka, which is a very popular Czech liqueur. It's kind of an herbal liqueur, and that's a good way to start. And let's say, Péter, tell us what you've got to toast with here tonight.
Well, this is Hungarian palinka made by my uncle. Very strong, very potent stuff. And this is what we greet our guests with every time we meet them.
Very good. And Polinka, is that like a brandy, like a?
Yeah, brandy. We make it out of whatever fruit we can put our hands on, basically.
Okay. And Darija, what are you toasting with?
I'm toasting with plavac, red wine from the south of Croatia, which is so connected to Zinfandel. So I found it interesting to connect the two countries.
Ah, perfect. All right. Well, let's do a cheers, and we'll take turns. And each of us, as we toast, let's also say that the way you say cheers in the country that you represent. I've got a Czech drink, but I'm going to do Polish because I've been doing a lot of Polish travel these days, and that would be na zdrowie. So I'll say na zdrowie. Peter, your turn.
Hungarians say egészségedre.
Okay. And Darija?
We say živjeli.
Živjeli. Okay. All right. Let's go. Na zdrowie.
Egészségedre.
Very good. Okay. Thank you so much. Well, we're really happy that you that'll get us off to an auspicious start. And we're really happy that you're joining us here tonight. In the first half of the show, we're going to talk a little bit more about Péter's area. So you'll hear from him more in the first half of the talk. And then Darija specializes in the country in the second half of the talk. So you'll hear more about her in the second half. But first, we want to talk a little bit more about what this region is that we're talking about, Central Europe. First of all, we do have several tours, including tours that our two guests guide in Central Europe. I'll just give a very quick rundown of your options here because we're covering 6 countries and they appear in different configurations on our various tours. We've got a best of Central Europe, Prague to Slovenia in 15 days tour. This is sort of the flagship, kind of the survey tour. So you're going to touch down in almost all of the countries that we're talking about here tonight just to get a taste. It's a great kind of one-shop stop to get a sample of each of these countries on a very efficient itinerary. If you want to dig deeper into the 2 greatest cities of Central Europe, you might consider the best of Prague and Budapest in 8 days tour. We've also got a very new tour. It's one of our newest tours, the Best of Poland in 10 days tour, which is exactly that. It's a great way to build on Krakow, which has always been part of our Central Europe tour. And by the way, this is our fastest, it's one of our newest tours. It's also our fastest growing tour. Year over year from last year, I think we've got almost double the number of seats on this tour. And I've been told there are a few seats left for this year. This is a really popular tour. People are really excited to go to Poland. So be sure to consider that as an option. And then the area of Darija's specialty is the Best of the Adriatic in 14 days. And so we've got 3 days in Slovenia, and most of the rest is in different parts of Croatia, including also a little detour into Bosnia-Herzegovina to get a taste of that country. And I will remind you that during this festival, until about next week, a week from tomorrow, you can get a special deal, $100 off any seat on any tour. You just have to use the code FEST24 when you book your tour. So if you're considering it, this is a good time to do it to save that money. Also, I've been told our Central Europe and our Adriatic tours are almost entirely sold out for 2024. So if you're dying to go to these countries this year, don't hesitate. Literally go on right now to ricksteves.com and book them because those seats might be gone by the end of the show. The other tours we're talking about have a little bit more capacity, but we're selling really fast this year, especially with this discount. So don't dilly-dally if you're thinking about going to Central Europe this year. I have done a lot of tour guiding in this area, but my main focus, the thing I spend most of my personal time on, is our guidebooks. I'm the co-author of several of our guidebooks covering this region, including our flagship Central Europe guidebook. Rick and I have been working on these guidebooks together for the last 20 years. In fact, this is the 20th anniversary of our Central Europe guidebook. And over that time, we've seen dramatic changes. If you can only imagine, as much as everything changes over that period, Central Europe has changed maybe more than anywhere else. A lot of places used to look like this when I started traveling in this region, and it's really worked hard to kind of tidy things up and make things clean and pristine. And this is now the more of the reality that you'd expect on the streets of Central Europe today. One of these changes just took place recently. For many years, we had our guidebook. I have the first edition right here is the 2004 Best of Eastern Europe guidebook. And this new edition that just came out a few weeks ago, we've decided we're going to officially retitle it. It's now Rick Steves Central Europe. And that's also the name of our tour. This tour we just mentioned that's 15 days used to be the Best of Eastern Europe. Now it's the Best of Central Europe. And you might be surprised, and when I listed these countries, you might think, well, I kind of think of that as Eastern Europe. And so we just want to address that a little bit off the top, why we made this change and why we think it's important. If you look at a map of Europe and you drop a line right down the middle, look at that. Prague is very close to the very geographical center of Europe. I've highlighted here the countries we're talking about tonight. And if you look at those countries, you can see why geographically they're very much in the center of Europe. And I really wanted each of our guides to talk about, as people who live there, one of the reasons Rick and I decided to make this change is because the people who live there have been telling us for years, we know that Americans might think of this as Eastern Europe, but for the people who live there, that's not necessarily the case. So I want each of our guests to explain what they think about this idea of Eastern versus Central Europe. Let's start with Peter. Tell me what you think about this.
Well, I've been calling this part of the world the heart of Europe, because frankly speaking, for 1,000 years, we've been firmly part of Europe, no question marks over there. And it was only during the communist times when we were forced to be part of the East, of course, against our will. And communism ended 40 years ago. So it's history. So I think it's a welcome change, and it's long overdue, if you ask me.
Well said. And Darija, what do you think about the Eastern versus Central idea?
Yeah, well, we honestly never thought about ourselves as Eastern Europe. We always thought about ourselves as sort of a Central Europe, because through history, Slovenia, Croatia were mostly connected to the Central European countries like Austria. Sort of our role model was always Vienna. And then the coastal part of the country was connected to Venice and to Italy. So those were sort of the areas that we were looking towards, not the Russia or the sort of a very east. So we always thought that we are Central Europe.
Very well said. Well, thank you both for validating this change. And Rick and I also feel like maybe we're in a position to sort of be role models in helping Americans get their heads around this thing that sort of seems so obvious to our European friends, that this is really Central Europe, even if we still might sort of in a knee-jerk way think of it as Eastern Europe. So it's very happy time that we can kind of make that change and lean into it. Speaking of these countries, I think it's time to dive right in. And as I mentioned, Darija is going to sort of step aside for a little while Peter and I talk about sort of the northern half of this region, Czech Republic, Poland, and Hungary. And then as soon as that's finished, Peter is going to step aside, and Darija will be our special guest in the second half, talking about Croatia, Slovenia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. And so we're going to start, Peter and I are going to start by talking about the first of our 6 countries, the Czech Republic. For a lot of folks, this is the first place they travel to, and maybe the only place they travel to in Central Europe. It's easily the most accessible and kind of most famous destination. Prague, the capital, of course, is the place that everyone flocks to. Just a very beautiful city, well-preserved architecture from every period, a gorgeous main square, the famous landmark Charles Bridge crossing the Vltava River, climbing up to Prague Castle, which is, by many measures, it's one of the largest castles on Earth. And Peter, I'm thinking about what it's like for you as a tour guide doing this survey tour where you go to multiple countries and cities. How do you explain to your tour members the differences between these different countries, how they're similar and how they're different?
Well, they may look different, but there are actually lots of similarities. Language, first of all, almost all the countries speak a variety of a Slav language. So if you speak Czech, you will understand Slovak, you will understand Polish, even understand a bit of Croatian and Slovenian. And we have a tremendous amount of shared history. Actually, throughout the last 1,000 years, we took Christianity at the same time. And then our golden ages happened at the same time. We suffered the same way during the last 500 years, so to say. And whatever happens in the Czech Republic, it still resonates with the Hungarian, it still resonates with the Poles. We understand each other's cultures pretty well. So there's a lot that connects us, a lot more than meets the eye.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think it must be a joy to be able to help people understand how these places are kind of the same. I think a lot of Americans might kind of put all these in the same category. Well, aren't those countries basically the same? And I know it's a fun challenge as a tour guide or in our guidebooks to help people appreciate the fine differences between the different places, even as they have a lot in common. Also in Prague, the main square is called Wenceslas Square. And this is sort of the stage upon which much of Czech history has played out. This is a statue of Saint Václav, or Good King Wenceslas of Christmas Carol fame. And one of the most important things that happened on this square was in 1989, they had what they call their Velvet Revolution. And this was a peaceful change of power from the end of communism to the looking forward to the period of democracy and freedom. And the way that the Czechs and the Slovaks gained their freedom is through a series of about 10 nights in a row, ever larger, giant protests filled Wenceslas Square. And important figures like Václav Havel, who was a very respected playwright and poet and philosopher who'd been imprisoned by the regime, kind of appeared. And basically the Czechs and Slovaks came together in hundreds of thousands and said, you know what, we do not want to be part of the communist system anymore. We don't want to be part of the Soviet bloc anymore. We want our own country. And sure enough, one morning they woke up and the Czechoslovak Politburo had voted itself out of existence. So yes, all of these countries that we're about to talk about were at some point in their history part of the communist part of Europe, but that was a very, very long time ago, 30 years ago. So as you travel through these countries, whether on your own or one of our tours, that's going to be an important part of the story, but it's not the only story. But I will say it's really interesting to be traveling with a tour guide, someone like Peter, who actually grew up during this time. And you were a kid basically during those period that I just showed where we were kind of getting out of the communist period. Tell me a little bit about what that was like for you.
Well, I was born in 1975, so I saw 15 years of the communist times. And you have to know that Hungary actually had two different types of communisms. There was a harsh version up till the early 70s, and then we had a more liberal version, which is what we used to call goulash communism. So I actually saw the goulash communist period in Hungary. And because it was a bit more liberal. It wasn't as tough as communism in the Czech Republic. So just to get an idea, in the late 70s, what I saw as a child is that we had two boring TV channels. The only good things were Tom and Jerry and Magilla Gorilla, for example. But over a time span of like 15 years, we went from the two boring TV channels to watching 100 and having access to MTV and Sky News and all the Western channels. Late 70s, we could only travel in the Eastern Bloc. And then slowly the regulations became a bit different. We could travel to Austria and Italy. And the collapse of communism wasn't so dramatic in my country as it was in Czechoslovakia or, in East Berlin. The wall had to come down and it was very dramatic. But in Hungary, communism just simply melted away from around us. It just went with a small puff rather than with a big bang. One day you're in communism, the next day you're not. This is basically what happened here.
Wow, that's fascinating. I mean, it's so fascinating I'm your age, Peter, so I remember watching this when I was in junior high school, happening across the ocean, and to be able to travel in these places and meet people like you who've been the eyewitness to history. That to me is a really special component of traveling in these countries. Very good. I will say we're leaving Prague now, and we're actually going to leave the Czech Republic. I told you this was going to be a whistle stop tour. We're going very fast. We don't have a lot of time in this talk to get into all the beautiful small towns. We're going to kind of focus on mainly the capital cities. But I will say each of these countries does have some really beautiful small towns. And we really recommend, if you have a little extra time beyond Prague, definitely get out and spend some time in smaller Czech towns. This is Český Krumlov down in the southern part of the country. Just a beautiful little kind of a jewel box of a storybook town and really fun to explore. So as you're putting together your itinerary, don't just focus on the big cities, even though that's kind of what we're doing here today, just for the sake of time. Now we're already moving into our next country, and it is Peter's home country of Hungary. And specifically, we're going to focus on the great capital of Hungary, Budapest, which I would say is not only the capital of Hungary, it's kind of the capital in a lot of ways of Central Europe. It's this great giant metropolis. It was one of the capitals with Vienna of all of these countries, 150 years ago. And it's just an endlessly entertaining city and a very kind of genteel city. There's a lot of big, monumental, elegant kind of elegance, I would say, in this city. So for instance, the beautiful Riverside Parliament building that you see here, you've got a beautiful castle quarter with lots of historic sites there. Incredible arts. There's a beautiful music scene in Budapest. They just recently restored their opera house, which is just breathtaking. I think it is arguably the finest opera house in any city in Europe. And they also have this wonderful tradition of thermal baths and thermal bathing. Now, Peter, it's interesting because, there's sort of the two main cities in this part of Central Europe are Prague and Budapest. There again, like, how do you think of them differently? How do you sort of explain them differently, these two great cities, to your tour members?
Well, I love the fact that we have got both cities on our tour because they are very, very different. We have a lot of common history, but the cities are very different. If you visit Prague, you will be checking out, the 1,000-year-old building and the 800-year-old building and the 400-year-old building. But Budapest, most of the city was built in the late 1800s. We say 1896. We had a big festival there, and everything was supposed to be, done by then. So you're not going to be running from one building to another, but you will be exploring different aspects of what happened in 1896 or what the city built around 1896. So as you can see the slideshow, you can actually take a beautiful cruise on the River Danube during the day or night. You can go to the baths, you can go to the market hall, you can go to the opera house, and you're going to get a completely different appreciation of what's here and also in Prague.
I never get tired of Budapest, I will say. I was just there this spring for, I think I was there for another 8 or 9 days. And I always have to pry myself away. It's a beautiful city and there's so much to see and do. And one of my favorite things to do in Budapest and really anywhere in Hungary is what we're looking at here. There's this beautiful thermal bathing tradition in Hungary. Lots of these naturally fed thermal baths. The water here is 100 degrees where you can just really relax. I love to go to the baths in Hungary because it's a beautiful opportunity to really relax and let down and recover from your sightseeing, but you can also feel like it's a sort of a culturally redeeming experience because you really are getting a look at the Hungarian culture. And for me, I love to take part in that Hungarian bathing culture when I'm in this country. So Peter, tell me a little bit about what it's like to live in a country where you have these wonderful thermal baths everywhere you turn.
It's awesome. I have to tell you, I love it. I love it. And many Americans think it's kind of intimidating experience, but we've got 1,000 hot springs in the country. We use only 1/3, but it still means that we have got 300 baths to go to. So for a Hungarian to go to the baths is like going to the Starbucks for the Americans. So Trader Joe's, okay. So this is an amazing experience, and I love the water. It is very relaxing. So after a hard days of sightseeing, it's awesome to sit in the hot water. But we also go there to hang out with our friends, talk about politics or play chess, as you could see on the slideshow. We've got tables for people to play chess on. It is just relaxing. And if you feel that this is intimidating because you think you will not be the skinniest person over there, don't worry about it. There will be plenty of big, mamushkas and babushkas in tiny bikinis and tiny speedos as well. So just go for it. It's honestly the best thing you can do in Budapest.
Yeah, I agree. It's a wonderful experience. And there's so many different kinds. I mean, we've been seeing some big spectacular ones, but you also have, this is actually an old Turkish style bath that they've renovated and kept a lot of the history intact. And it's just an absolutely wonderful part of exploring Hungary, especially Budapest. So however you end up in these countries, if you're on a tour or with a guidebook, make sure that you take some time to relax in these beautiful 100-degree waters of the thermal baths of Hungary. Another great thing to do when you're in Hungary is to really get to know the cuisine. And Peter mentioned earlier, there's, in addition to the opera house and the baths and the parliament, you have some beautiful market halls around Budapest from this year of 1896. And I love to go into the market hall. This is the great market hall, the biggest and the best. And it's great to just kind of walk down the aisles and sort of see how Hungarians cook and what their food culture is. And I will say Hungary, I think the food in general in the countries of Central Europe is outstanding. I think it's a lot better than you might give it credit for. I think people might have some knee-jerk ideas that this must just be kind of heavy, bleak, wintry foods, but actually there's a tremendous amount of diversity and really delicious flavors. And from country to country, each cuisine is very, very different. And for me, I think maybe Hungarian food might be my favorite in this region. It's really flavorful and spicy. They use a lot of paprika, for example. So you get a lot of really bright, bold flavors, absolutely delicious. Peter, tell us a little bit more about Hungarian cuisine.
Well, it's 3 a.m. for me, but I'm getting hungry right now just by looking at your slideshow here. This is a perfect example of what we've got here. Central Europe has got a lot of nations that love soups. So if you visit the area, you will be eating a lot of soups. We say the soup fills you up and the dish plugs you up, because very often the soup is the major part of the meal and we just eat something on the side. And if you make it to the market hall, obviously you will be able to eat Hungarian goulash. This is what you're looking at right now. But you should make a point of going down to the basement and find something very interesting over there. Lots of pickled vegetables. We're not traditionally, we've not been really good with salads, but we pickle everything. So if there's a vegetable, we pickle it for you. And you should try that one as well. And maybe a third recommendation, if you go upstairs in the market hall, you can get langos, which is basically Hungarian beach food. It's a deep fried dough, size like a giant elephant ear, and we put sour cream and cheese on it. It's heavy, but it's heavenly. So lots of recommendations there.
Oh man, yeah. Now you're making me hungry, and it is my dinner time. So I might have to call out for Hungarian food if I can find it after our talk here tonight. I will say we've talked a lot about traditional Hungarian food. Budapest also has a fantastic contemporary food scene. So for example, they take traditional Hungarian recipes and they do it in a really modern, interesting way. And then there's lots of international flavors and preparations that have filtered into all of these places, but Budapest in particular. I mean, I think Budapest for me is one of the best food cities anywhere in Europe. Every time I go to Budapest, I run out of meals to eat before I run out of places I want to try. There's always some amazing hot new places where the chef's doing some really cool creative things. So if you're a foodie like I am, Budapest is a wonderful city. Speaking of the food, I'll just talk a little bit about some of these other countries and their cuisine. The Czechs, I'd say of all the cuisines of these countries, the Czech food is probably what you might think of as the heavy Eastern European or Central European food. It's a lot of pork and kraut and potatoes, and it's pretty heavy. But the Czechs do have outstanding beer, some of the best and cheapest beer anywhere in Europe. The Czechs are famous for. And then if we're going to move on to our next country here in a moment, Poland, I think Polish food is also outstanding. And I think it's very underrated. Poland has a lot of wonderful variety in their food. Lots of kind of cold weather ingredients in Poland. You have a lot of beets and a lot of cream and a lot of berries and things that you might think of that would be in sort of Russian food. It's sort of the cold weather ingredients. And one of the classic Polish dishes is pierogi, which is this sort of handmade ravioli. And I will say, on our new Poland tour that I was mentioning, we have this wonderful experience where we actually take our groups into the market hall in Krakow, and they have to go do the shopping for the ingredients. And then we split them into small groups and take our tour members into kitchens of regular people around the city of Krakow. And you have somebody who's actually Polish teaching you from their heritage, the way their grandma or their grandpa or their family taught them how to make pierogi by hand. Goes back centuries. I had this wonderful experience when I did our Poland tour, and a woman who was doing this turned to me and she said, this is exactly how my grandma taught me to do it 60 years ago when I was a little girl. And so this is a wonderful experience. And at the end, of course, you get to sit down and enjoy eating all of that pierogi. So I would say we try to incorporate these food experiences on all of our tours, like in Budapest and Hungary, for example. On one of our tours, we do a cooking class, so you get a taste of that food as well. But I would say this pierogi making class that we do on our Poland tour may be one of the best food experiences I've had, not just in Central Europe, but anywhere in Europe. It's just a wonderful experience. So I've already started in with our third country. I told you this would be a quick tour, and that is Poland. And we're going to start off in what is clearly the showcase city. If you had to pick one place in Poland to go to, it would have to be this beautiful city of Krakow, the historic capital down in the south of the country. This is the city that's on our Best of Central Europe tour, and it's also on our Poland tour. So either of our tours that go to Poland, you're going to go to Krakow. And the centerpiece of Krakow is one of the finest, most beautiful, most inviting main squares anywhere in Europe. Again, not just Central Europe, but really anywhere in Europe. And boy, Peter, you and I have bumped into each other, I think in this very square 2 or 3 times, even though you're Hungarian and I'm American. You're often here with our tours, and I feel like you and I have shared a beer at one of these tables many times. Tell me what it's like bringing your tour members to this beautiful square when you bring our tours to Krakow.
This is always a wow moment. We usually come in late in the day, and even if we just have like 5 minutes, I'll say, hey guys, we're going to go to the main square, say wow, and then move on to have dinner. And whoever wants to stay on the main square afterwards, they can. Because just as you said, Cameron, this is one of the most magnificent main squares of Europe. Easily, this could be anywhere in Italy, and the Italians would be proud of it. And I just love it. I think it's a fascinating place. Not only is it one of the biggest squares, but there's also something going on there. There's always music played there. There's a festival going on there. There's always something happening on the square. And the single best thing that I like about the main square is that it's home to the locals. So it's not for the tourists, because several main squares in Europe are filled by tourists. But here it's the Poles. They call it Krakow's living room, and they go there. So you're actually hanging out with tons of locals on this magnificent piazza over here.
I love what you said there, Peter. This is a square so beautiful it makes the Italians jealous of how beautiful it is. I agree totally. Great. Lots to see in Krakow. Tons of sightseeing here. This was the historic capital of Poland before the modern capital moved up to Warsaw. So down at the southern tip of the old town, you have Wawel Castle, which was the historic seat of the Polish kings. Wawel Cathedral, the centerpiece of that castle, is the most important church for Polish Catholics worldwide. There's also a really important piece of Jewish history in Krakow and throughout Poland. During the Middle Ages, Polish kings were more tolerant than most. So Poland became a homeland for a lot of Jewish people from all over Europe. They would flock to Poland. There was a huge Jewish population here all the way through the early 20th century. And there was a district just a short tram ride or a longish walk from the old town called Kazimierz. And this is where a lot of the Jewish sites are in Krakow. I should say there are wonderful Jewish sites in all of the places we're talking about. Prague has a great Jewish quarter. Budapest has a spectacular synagogue. But I'd say Krakow, Kazimierz is maybe the best and most interesting place to learn about this chapter in Central European history. You might have heard or sort of be familiar with this area because this is where Oskar Schindler, the German industrialist, had his factory and made his list of his Jewish workers that he protected from the Nazis during the Holocaust. And in fact, the Oskar Schindler factory has been turned into a fascinating museum about World War II, the experience of World War II here in Krakow and throughout Poland. And there's also lots of old cemeteries and synagogues that you can tour and learn a little bit more about this history. Of course, the most tragic chapter in that story came in the mid-20th century, which is when Poland became the site of, after it was invaded and occupied by the Nazi German war machine, it became the site of many Nazi German concentration camps on Polish soil. The most notorious of these was Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is about an hour and a half outside of Krakow. And I would say visiting here is a very powerful, very important experience to actually be in this location, walking past these buildings. This is the first part of the camp, Auschwitz I, which were old Polish military barracks that were turned into a concentration camp. Most of these buildings now are filled with museum exhibits that are very powerful in telling this story. And then you can travel to the second part of the camp, Auschwitz II or Birkenau. And this was just this vast field of these kind of makeshift barracks where the Nazis, they basically, the local tour guide has described this in a way that I find very evocative. And they say this was a factory for the mass production of death. This was just a place where the Nazis built all of these, there's actually 4 different crematoria and all of these barracks, and they would just send new arrivals directly to the gas chambers. This horrifying scene that we all saw in the movie Schindler's List, and we know about if we've studied this history. It's an incredibly powerful, incredibly important site. And Peter, I'm really intrigued. You're, as a tour guide, how many times have you taken groups to this? How many times have you experienced Auschwitz?
I think the correct number is 77 right now.
77 times. And after all those times, what is your impression of this in the context of visiting Central Europe?
Well, I've been there 77 times, and I always make a point of not to miss the tour, but because I think it's very important. And this, if there's a life-changing experience to be had on this tour or in Central Europe, this is one of them. And it's obviously you're going to go there, learn about the names and the dates, and then you'll be walked through the whole history of the Holocaust. But what's more important for me personally, having been there so many times, is that I always come out trying to be a better person, and it's an amazing experience. So nothing can be so powerful as Auschwitz. And honestly, I've never met any tour member who would have regretted going to Auschwitz. So if you ever go that close, make a point of going to Auschwitz, because it will not disappoint, and you will never regret going there.
It is a very powerful place, a thing to visit. It's essentially a memorial. It's a museum and a memorial. This is a location where over 1 million people were killed by the Nazis, most of them Jewish people. And as Peter said, we do go here on our Central Europe tour. If you're traveling on your own, we also have very detailed instructions in our guidebook for how to do it. I will say, if you're going on your own, be aware this is one of these sites where you do need to make a reservation in advance. So if you're thinking about going to Poland and doing this on your own, there's a variety of tours and drivers who can take you from Krakow, but make sure you need to book ahead for this very, very important, as Peter said, life-changing experience. Before we leave Poland and before we leave Peter, I wanted to talk a little bit more about some other places in Poland. We've been talking about Krakow and Auschwitz, which is just outside of Krakow. And for years and years, that's been an important part of our Central Europe tour. But those of us with an affinity for Poland have been excited to do a tour devoted just to Poland. And so we have now, starting about 3 years ago, it's our Best of Poland in 10 Days tour. I had the privilege of being able to design this tour, and I also got to go and be one of the guides who led, there's a team of 5 of us guides who led the first ever one of these Poland tours. And I will say, this is just a wonderful tour. As I said, it's sort of our fastest growing tour, and we have a wonderful group of Polish guides. None of these folks are here with us tonight, but they're all here in spirit, and you'd be very lucky to have any of them be your guide on this trip through Poland. Whether you're thinking about a tour or going on your own, I'll just run through a few more places in Poland that I think are really worth considering. There's the modern capital city of Warsaw, which was badly destroyed in World War II and has a lot of sort of this communist era architecture, but they also rebuilt the very pristine and beautiful old town. It was pretty well leveled after the war, but they painstakingly rebuilt it. And so surprisingly, Warsaw, this big and kind of busy, bustling city also has this very charming old town and Old Town Square. One thing I think is really wonderful in Warsaw is they have a variety of outstanding museums, and a lot of these have just opened in the last 5 or 10 years. For example, there's a Jewish history museum. Now, I talked earlier a little bit about Kazimierz, the Jewish quarter, and about Auschwitz. And a lot of times when you learn about the Jewish story in Central Europe, the focus tends to be on the Holocaust, which is extremely important. But what I love about this museum in Warsaw, the Jewish History Museum, the history of the Museum of the Museum of the History of Polish Jews is the official name, is that it tells the whole story of Jewish people in Poland, not just the Holocaust. So it gives you a lot more context and appreciation for this incredibly rich and incredibly important culture that has been a very important pillar of all of these different countries of Central Europe over the centuries. Warsaw is also the hometown of Chopin, and there's a wonderful variety of ways to enjoy a Chopin concert while you're there. Lots of other great cities as you move north. There's a gorgeous sort of fairy tale gingerbread red brick city called Torun that we enjoy taking our tours to. And not too far away is this spectacular red brick Gothic castle called Malbork. Really wonderful sights. And I love Krakow, but I will say, I'm not saying I like this city better, but it's pretty darn close. This is Gdansk, which is up on the northern coast of Poland. Another really wonderful destination, maritime city. This is sort of the New Orleans of Poland. It's where the main river enters the ocean, enters the sea. And so therefore, it's been sort of a hub for culture and trade, and it's a cultural crossroads, beautiful architecture, beautiful back lanes. This is also the place, you might be familiar with it, where Lech Wałęsa, or you might think of him as Lech Walesa, in 1980 created the Solidarity Trade Union, which helped bring down the communist regime in Poland. All of that happened in the shipyards here in Gdansk. So I would say Gdansk is another great city in Poland you should consider if you're thinking about a trip to Poland. All right, well, we've covered our first 3 countries, sort of the northern half of Central Europe. And I want to thank Peter. Peter will be back a little later for a few final words and to answer some questions. As always, we're collecting some questions in our Q&A widget there at the bottom. But he's going to hand it off now to Darija, Darija Gotić from Zagreb, who's a Croatian. She's going to talk to us a little bit more about this region. Mainly, we're going to focus on 3 countries. Croatia is that big boomerang-shaped country in the middle of this map. Slovenia up in the north, and then you see Croatia's kind of wrapped around a 3rd country, Bosnia-Herzegovina. We're going to talk about that as well. Now, these 3 countries for many years were part of a much bigger country called Yugoslavia. There are actually 6 countries, now 7, that were part of Yugoslavia. And Darija, I'm just going to throw you right in with a complicated topic, but Yugoslavia broke apart 30 years ago, but in your lifetime, this existed. You were born in Yugoslavia, I guess. Tell me a little bit about what you think of. I think a lot of Americans, when they think of these countries, Yugoslavia is the connection. Tell us what the reality
Exactly.
comes to that.
Yeah. So first of all, we have to say that most Americans, when they think about Yugoslavia, they think about communist Yugoslavia that was formed after the Second World War. But Yugoslavia actually, as a country of South Slavs, that's what the name means. So Yug means South, so it's South Slavia, the country of South Slavs. It was formed after First World War when Austro-Hungary fell apart, that Croatia and Slovenia and at the end also Bosnia and Herzegovina were part of. And after First World War, when that fell apart, then the first country of South Slav was formed. It was a kingdom, and the king was from the Serbian dynasty and with the center in Belgrade. And then after Second World War, that became a communist country. And that's what mostly people sort of think about when they think about Yugoslavia. And as is shown on this map, there were 6 republics and 2 provinces, and existed for 45 years. And then at the end, unfortunately, we didn't have Velvet Revolution. We had wars, first for about 10 days, short conflict in Slovenia, then unfortunately 4 years in Croatia, and a little bit after that, also Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the things became even uglier. So altogether, finished with the war. Yeah, and now it's of course already quite some time after that, and the countries are developing a little bit differently. So it's interesting for the visitors to hear about that, but also with the idea that that's not all that was happening here, that there are layers and layers of history before that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great theme, really, as you're probably picking up on if you're watching for this whole talk. As Americans, we might have a tendency to think we know what Central or Eastern Europe is, or we know what Yugoslavia is. But as you start to travel here and get to know the places and get to know the people, you really understand these periods were a discrete little chunk of a much longer, grander, more complex, more nuanced story. And I'd say that's a real joy of traveling in these countries, especially with someone like Darija or someone like Péter, as they can kind of help you understand that context and give you a full appreciation. So we wanted to kind of tip the hat. Yes, these are the countries that were part of Yugoslavia. From now on, we're going to kind of ignore Yugoslavia and talk about each one individually. I will say, I'd like to emphasize what Darija said. There was some really terrible bloodshed and some warfare that took place about 30 years ago as Yugoslavia broke apart. And you do still see some memorials and occasionally even some damage, but from a travel perspective, and from the perspective of the people who live here, that's really long ago history. It's not something that's very front and center in their minds. They've really moved on, and each country has really found its own identity for sure, or rediscovered its own identity. We're going to start in Darija's home country, and I'd say kind of the marquee destination of this whole area, which is Croatia. This beautiful, beautiful country, and there's a lot to see in Croatia, and we're going to talk in a moment about. I'm going to show you first some of the stereotypical Croatia, and then Darija is going to talk about some parts of Croatia that are a little bit different. But I think for most travelers, when you think of Croatia, you think of this: fun in the sun, going swimming in the beautiful, crystal clear, shimmering Adriatic, amazing sunsets. And as Darija said, I think from a historian's point of view, the layers of history here are fascinating. As you travel around Croatia, you see different civilizations building on top of each other. So you have ancient Roman ruins, and then you turn away and there's a beautiful Venetian style bell tower. It's just a delightful place to travel, a place that we really enjoy. There's lots of beautiful coastal towns all over Croatia. You could pick any of them and have a great time. This is our favorite. This is where we take our tours. This is a place that Rick and I really recommend in our guidebook. Rovinj, a beautiful, beautiful coastal town on a peninsula in the northern part of the country. Just a great, relaxing place to get a taste of small town Croatia. And very nearby is a big city called Pula, which has some of the best Roman ruins, ancient Roman ruins, anywhere in Europe, really, and certainly in Croatia. This is a beautifully preserved amphitheater here in Pula. There's also old Roman temples. Darija, tell me a little bit about this part of Croatia and what you enjoy about it.
Yeah, well, the whole Istria is really fascinating, and it's a great place to come, not only for the architecture, also for bikers. It's a great biking destination, for sort of a cuisine, so for restaurant lovers, for foodies. So really a lot of different great experiences in Istria. And then these two cities that you mentioned, both very interesting and totally different, you know. So Rovinj, so picture perfect town that then of course attracts tourists and could be quite crowded. But if you go early in the morning or in the evenings, then it's a completely different idea. And then Pula, that's actually in the industrial town for decades, for a really long time. And till very recently, the main economy of the city was shipyard. So tourism was not that important. And that's why even today, when you walk through Pula, you have a completely different feeling. Most of the people you meet around are locals who just go to the market or wait for the bus or go to the university, because it's also a university town. And it's a bit shabby, so it's not this kind of a touristy looking town, but it gives you a great opportunity to see how actually people live in one of these coastal towns.
It is a really interesting part of Croatia. This is Istria, this sort of triangular shaped peninsula up in the north of Croatia. And it's, as Darija is saying, there's so much variety that you can see in just a short drive or a short bus ride. to really get a taste of this part of Croatia. We just showed some of the coastal parts of Croatia. We're going to see more in a moment. But a lot of people, when they think of Croatia, they don't think of interior cities. They don't think of the interior of Croatia. And even though this place that we're seeing here, it's the one place we're talking about that's not on any of our tours, but I decided to include it because this is Darija's hometown of Zagreb, the capital city of Croatia, which I really enjoy. I love the city of Zagreb. It's not really what you'd expect when you think of Croatia. It's a bustling, modern, urban city. Darija, tell us a little bit about, sell our people on your hometown, why they might want to make sure they add on a visit to Zagreb to their next visit to Croatia.
Yes, well, Zagreb is totally different than the coastal cities. So this part of Croatia was for practically 400 years, first in the Habsburg monarchy, before that for centuries in the union with Hungary. So there is this Middle European atmosphere in the city. Two small cities on two small hills. You showed one of them with the first slide. That was my high school at the left-hand side. Yes, this building to the left at the top of the hill next to the tower. And then there is this, so these two small cities on two small hills, it's practically medieval part of the city. And then 19th century part of town was built underneath with a beautiful line of 8 parks connected in the shape of a letter U or a horseshoe. So we call it the Green Horseshoe of Zagreb. This was the first one, Zrinjevac, with the fountains and the music pavilion in the middle. We'll still use this public space a lot, not only this one, but all these lower town areas for a lot of festivals. Really, we try really hard with different kinds of festivals all year round, from street art festival to classical music outdoor festival to festival of light, Christmas market, those being just the sort of a most popular ones. And so a lot to see, a lot to do. It can also be a great base to visit some of the things around, a couple of nice castles, also some thermal baths if somebody wants to just relax, some nature as well, including the Plitvice Lakes that you will mention. So I hope that it will at least some of the guests find it interesting. As I said, totally different, not only in architecture, but only in food, in music, in language, in traditions, because of these different histories. Coastal area was for practically 400 years connected to Venice, and this part to Vienna and to Hungary. So that's why differences. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a great city. I'm really glad you can advocate for it here. And I think it's one of those great underrated, underappreciated places that I think is worth a visit for sure. Darija just mentioned another location in the interior of Croatia, not part of the coastline, that is really worth a detour, and that is Plitvice Lakes National Park. This is a gorgeous national park buried deep in the mountains of the interior of Croatia. It's basically a Grand Canyon that's filled with 16 terraced lakes, and they're all connected by these stunning waterfalls, and they've built an incredible walkway, a pedestrian boardwalk that connects all of these lakes and waterfalls and cascades. There are places you literally walk across a gushing waterfall. It's just a breathtaking experience. We actually include this on both of our tours, our Central Europe tour and our Adriatic tour, because it's so spectacular, such a special location. Plitvice Lakes National Park. You can get there on your own if you'd like as well. And it's really worth, if you want a little taste of nature that's not coastal nature, this is a great place for it. We are going to head now back to the coastline of Croatia to finish up the country here. And we're on the sort of the southern third. We talked about Istria up in the north. This is the southern third of the Croatian coastline called the Dalmatian coast. There's a great big city at the it's kind of the anchor and the transport hub for this area called Split. This is a big bustling, busy port city, it also has some amazing history. We keep talking about layers of history. And this was actually, the old town of Split was actually the old retirement palace of the Roman Emperor Diocletian. Now, I'm not saying that the palace was in the old city. The old city was literally the hallways and the structure of the palace. It's one and the same. And as you walk through Diocletian's palace in the old town of Split, on the left here, you see the mausoleum of Diocletian from the Roman period, and then you see a Venetian bell tower that was built right next to it. A great kind of example of this layering of history that you find in Croatia. You can really tour all of these sites related to Diocletian's palace. And Split is also a really interesting, busy, thriving, real city. A lot of the places we're going to are small, kind of pretty touristy, but Split is a great mix because it's a hardworking city. It's got this history. It's accessible to tourists, but it's also a very local feeling city. It's also a great place to catch a boat to do some island hopping. So we love to take on our tours or in our guidebooks, we really suggest people do some island hopping while they're in Croatia. You can get on a boat in Split and go to any number of great islands. One of our favorites is Korčula. We spent 2 nights here on our tour of our Adriatic tour to give people sort of a vacation from their vacation. It's just a beautiful, little, small, pristine old town on the Croatian coast and a great place to just relax. Lots of great choices, by the way. If you want to go Croatian island hopping, we've got recommendations in our book, or you can do some online research. There's no shortage of great places to enjoy Croatian islands along the Dalmatian coast and beyond. Our next destination, our final destination in Croatia, is certainly its most famous, most popular destination, and that is Dubrovnik, this beautiful walled medieval city. It's called the Pearl of the Adriatic, with its incredibly intact walls surrounding this endless sea of red rooftops. Really an incredibly beautiful place. Lots of interesting little tucked away corners and alleys and sites. But I will say Dubrovnik is very, very popular and very crowded. And Darija, I'd love for you to give us some pointers on how to avoid the crowds when you're in Dubrovnik. It's hard to resist going to Dubrovnik, but once you're there, what do you do to get away from the crowds?
Well, I will tell you the fact that makes Dubrovnik mostly crowded are cruise ships. So you just have to be sure to avoid the time when they are there. And they usually arrive to the old town around 10, 11, and then they would stay till about 4. So if you avoid that time, it's going already to be a completely different feeling. So mornings and evenings, definitely. And the evenings are really spectacular because then the city is lighted. So really nice to be there anyway. And then also the old town is small, but it's mostly crowded on the 2 main streets. So if you go just a little bit to the side, into the side streets, you already have a completely different feeling. Of course, the bad news are stairs. So it's stairs all the way. It doesn't go without stairs in Dubrovnik. But really worth walking around and worth seeing. Very touristy, but still also locals live here as well. So interesting, definitely worth seeing.
And my favorite attraction, my favorite activity in Dubrovnik is you can actually walk around the top of that city wall we've been seeing. So it takes about an hour, depending on how busy it is. It can be very hot and sunny up there, but boy, it's a spectacular experience. Think about walking all the way around the top of the city wall. You've got a sea of red rooftops on one side, and you've got the actual sea on the other side. And every place you want to pull over to the side and get out your camera, you just have a spectacular panorama looking out over the beautiful, beautiful city of Dubrovnik. This is a great place for us to finish our time in Croatia. I wish we had more time here, but this is a great stop. It's also the final stop on our Best of the Adriatic tour, and a great place for people to finish up there as well. We're going to finish up our talk and our tour here with 2 more small countries, and then we'll take some questions in a few minutes. But the next country is really right next to the Dalmatian coast. I was just showing all these pictures of Split and Korčula and Dubrovnik. And from any of those places, it's 2 or 3 hours drive over the mountains, and you're in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Specifically, this is the city of Mostar, which is an old historic, actually a Turkish town, built by or developed by the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. And it really has this sort of old Turkish flavor, really striking to be not that far from the Croatian coastal resorts, and suddenly you're in a very different place. Part of the former Yugoslavia, like Croatia, but certainly feels very, very different. One thing I love about as a tour guide and someone who writes guidebooks, taking people or encouraging people to go to Bosnia is a great opportunity to really understand the Muslim culture, because a large percentage of Bosnia's population are still practicing Muslims. And it's a different kind of, Islam takes different forms in different places. And this is a slightly different flavor of Islam than you might find in other places. It's very integrated with European culture. And it's a great opportunity if you've never really gotten a chance to step into a mosque with a Muslim person and have them tell you a little bit about their beliefs. This is an incredible opportunity to do that, and an easy add-on if you're going to be in Croatia anyway. Again, this is a few hours drive from Dubrovnik or Split. We actually take our Adriatic tours here just to make sure they get that little opportunity to understand this aspect of the culture. By the way, Mostar is also just a really beautiful city. It's set in this incredible valley, and it has this historic bridge called the Old Bridge that has a very powerful story. This was built 400 years ago or 500 years ago, and it stood strong for all those centuries until these wars in the 1990s when Yugoslavia broke up. The bridge was actually bombarded from the mountaintop above and fell into the river below, and now it's been rebuilt. So it's a very powerful symbol of sort of reunification and people trying to come back together and recovery, I would say. Darija, tell me a little bit, what are your thoughts about people traveling to Bosnia-Herzegovina, specifically to Mostar, if they're visiting Croatia?
Oh, I think it's a must. I mean, when you're so close, it would be a shame to miss this, because you have, as you said, the view into a completely different culture. So again, not only architecture, but the food, some great sweets from Turkish influence. And then also the sort of people that are great. They are people with great sense of humor, great filmmakers, great athletes. So really a different perspective, because again, for many of the Americans, when somebody say Bosnia and Herzegovina, they first think about the war. But again, so many layers of history, 400 years of Ottoman Empire in that area. And you realize then that these mountains between Croatian coast and the Bosnia and Herzegovina were the borders between the Muslim and the Christian Europe. So nowadays, border between Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina were actually important part in European history for a long time. And that's why it's so great to see it, to see these differences. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, I would say Bosnia is a must if you're going to be in the area. And now we've reached our sixth and final country of our 6-country whistle stop, incredibly quick tour. And that is up north. It's just north of Croatia. It's actually touching the Italian Alps and the Austrian Alps. And that is the country of Slovenia. This is a very small country, but a very, very beautiful country, one that's close to my heart. It's an alpine country. As I said, there's a corner of Slovenia where you've got the Austrian Alps, the Italian Alps, the Slovenian Alps, all kind of run into each other. Very beautiful place. The capital city of Ljubljana is called Slovenia is called Ljubljana, one of my favorite small cities anywhere. It's just a very charming, relaxing place to spend time. It's got a hill in the middle of the city with a little castle on it and a beautiful old town at the base of that hill. And it's just a great place to stroll and to browse and to window shop and to sit and have a coffee. Darija, you live in Zagreb, which is, you're not exactly rival cities, but you're kind of comparable. You're the 2 capital cities and you're a quick train ride apart. What are your impressions of Ljubljana?
Oh, I like Ljubljana very much, especially that beautiful city center along the river. And the Slovenians and Ljubljana people made a really great job in restoring Ljubljana. So this city center and these couple of the central streets are now really beautifully looking with these colorful buildings. On Sundays, there is also a flea market, which gives another great atmosphere to that area, and that castle at the top. And then just sort of a 10 minutes walk from the main square, you are in a completely different area again. Green spaces along the river that are great for biking, or sort of village-like neighborhoods where people grow fruits and vegetables for the market. So it's really, really nice, really cozy, relaxing city. Doesn't feel like a capital of a country, but it is.
I agree. It doesn't feel at all like a national capital, but it is very charming. It might be maybe the most or one of the most underrated, underappreciated cities in Europe, right up there with Gdansk in Poland that I was showing you. I think if you're looking to be in on a secret and to go somewhere that a lot of Americans don't know about, that is just going to blow your socks off, Ljubljana and then Gdansk in Poland are spectacular. Slovenia, as I said, is really dominated by its mountains. When a lot of the destinations in Slovenia are up in the mountains and up in the foothills of the Alps, there's this beautiful lake called Lake Bled. It's a beautiful place just to be on vacation, enjoy some nice scenery. You can walk around the perimeter of the lake in about an hour, hour and a half. Take pictures of the ever-changing views. There's a beautiful little island right in the middle of the lake, and there's a traditional style of boat that they make only here at Lake Bled called a Plitna boat. You can see it in the foreground there. You can load onto a Plitna boat, and they'll take you out. The oarsman will row you all the way out to this little island, and you're supposed to climb those stairs and ring the church bell and make a wish. And it's just a beautiful place. Lake Bled is a wonderful place to just relax and enjoy being in the mountains in Slovenia, in a very gorgeous rural setting. If you want to really enjoy the Slovenian mountains, you can go even higher into the mountains. And there's a beautiful part of the mountains called the Julian Alps that's just a very scenic drive from Lake Bled or from Ljubljana. Once you get up into this area, you're driving along the Soča River, which is this turquoise, crystal clear, beautiful river that rushes through mountain valleys. So it's a great place for water sports. People come here for whitewater rafting and that sort of thing. It's also got some really interesting history because this little corner of Slovenia, remember, right next to Italy and Austria, is a site of some really interesting World War I war ruins. Some really fierce fighting took place here in this part of Slovenia during World War I, not World War II. In fact, Ernest Hemingway, he wrote his novel, A Farewell to Arms, about his time driving an ambulance in this part of Slovenia during World War I. So it's a very beautiful place for high mountain scenery, but you also have this interesting history and these charming little mountain villages. Darija, I'll give you the final word about the Slovenian mountains. What do you like about this area?
Oh, gorgeous. Not too touristy, so it's still the place where you will see mostly Slovenians coming. Slovenians are crazy about sports, especially climbing, so these kind of water sports. From all of these nations of ex-Yugoslavia, I would say they are the biggest sort of amateur athletes. Whenever there is a hill, they will climb. But for foreigners, that's not so known. So you will not have, crowds of people going around the paths with you. So it's a fantastic place. All very well organized, so you can go on your own as well, really easily, or take some of the tours. So it's really anyhow a really great place. And then, of course, some of this history that very often people know very little about. First World War and what was happening in this area. It's really interesting and shocking in the way. So there is a First World War museum in Kobarid, definitely worth a stop if you are there.
Well, thank you so much for helping us better understand these interesting countries. And we're going to wrap it up here pretty quickly, but we do have some Q&A coming up. We've been collecting your questions, and also we're going to hear one more time from each of our guest guides. But first, I wanted to very quickly remind you, we've seen 6 countries, all these beautiful places, and you might be wondering, how do you weave them together? So here's some itineraries to consider, our tour itineraries. And by the way, if you're doing it on your own, these tour itineraries also work really well as an independent trip if you want to do it on your own. But we have the places that Darija and I have been talking about for the second part of the show. Almost all the places that we just talked about, except Zagreb, are on the Best of the Adriatic in 14 Days tour. We start in Ljubljana, this beautiful Slovene capital, head up through Lake Bled and into the mountains that we talked about, Istria, down through Plitvice, those beautiful waterfalls, then down along the Dalmatian coast from Split, Korčula, Dubrovnik, with a stop in Mostar. That's a wonderful tour. Again, if you want the survey tour, the one that's kind of the greatest hits of almost, I mean, everything we've talked about. We talked about 6 countries. Well, 5 of them, their best stops are on this tour. It's our best of Central Europe, Prague to Slovenia in 15 days tour. We start in Prague. We head over to Krakow. We take a side trip to Auschwitz. Then we head down through Hungary, including some time in Budapest. We go down to those beautiful waterfalls that the Plitvice Lakes in Croatia. We spend a couple of nights in that gorgeous coastal town of Rovinj, the first place we talked about in Croatia, and we finish up at Lake Bled in Slovenia. That's a spectacular tour if you want to just get a taste of all of these countries in one easy package. If you want to really dig into the 2 great cities, we've got our Prague and Budapest in 8 days tour. And then this is the brand new, wonderful, fastest selling this year tour, Best of Poland in 10 days. That includes Gdansk, this wonderful city on the north coast. We go to Malbork Castle in the beautiful red brick town of Torun. And then we get plenty of time, 3 nights in Warsaw to really dig in there. And we finish up with 3 nights in Krakow to really dig in there. And one more reminder, you've got 1 more week to save $100 per person using that code to get the discount for $100 per seat if you book a Rick Steves tour. And remember, Ben mentioned this at the top of the show. Tomorrow night, we're having our grand finale Zoom at Rick's house. And we're going to be giving away a 7-day city tour. If you haven't signed up for this yet, go to that ricksteves.com/giveaway and put your name in the hat, and maybe you'll get lucky tomorrow. If you and if whether or not you win the tour, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow night's party at Rick's house. That's tomorrow at 6 o'clock Pacific time, 9 o'clock Eastern. And before we take your questions, I would like both Darija and Péter. Is there one thing that you'd like us to know, you'd like our viewers to know about your country that you haven't gotten to talk about yet? What or your country or your region or your city or whatever it is? Darija, I'm going to start with you. If there's one thing you want people to take away that we maybe they might not think of before this show, what would you like to tell them?
Well, I hope they got the idea that this is not the Eastern Bloc, and that this is not sort of the ex-communist country only, that there are so many layers of history that actually, as I usually say, whoever was around stopped by. So we have from Romans and Mongolians to the Ottomans, and then all these Middle European rulers. So there are influences from all of that, but still placed in these small, relaxing towns. So you don't have to worry about booking your museum tickets 3 months in advance. You just come, walk around, enjoy, and then get a little bit of history and sort of a knowledge about the area that most Americans know little or almost nothing about. And I can say that usually it's a positive surprise.
Great. And Péter, what would you like to tell our viewers?
I would connect with what Darija said and just emphasize the fact that there's an element of surprise to visiting Central Europe. There are so many underappreciated and underrated locations over here. If you go to Western Europe, you will know what you get. You will enjoy it, but you will come to Central Europe and you'll say, hey, why have I never learned about this? Why have I not known about Gdansk and the Minsk of Kraków or any other small location? So if you want to come to a place which is rewarding and will surprise you at the same time, I think this is it.
Very well said. I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thank you both. And I'm going to kick it back over to Ben, and I think he's going to ask us a few questions that have come up.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Cameron, Darija, Péter. You've reminded me why Central Europe is my favorite region. Well done.
I reminded myself of that.
I believe it. And I'm happy to say that we've had a very engaged audience tonight. We've received many questions. I'm going to start with a few practical questions. Péter, Cameron, do you need to reserve a time for the baths in Budapest?
Péter, I'll let you take this.
All right. No, you don't. There are so many places to go to. You just don't need to. If you want to, you can. But I think you want to time it with the weather. You don't want to go there when it's too hot. You don't want to, maybe on a day when you can do other sightseeing options, you would do those and then go to the baths when the weather's perfect. Actually, the baths works if it snows, if it rains. So this can be your rainy day activity.
I'd say it's even better in the cold and drizzly weather. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Karen asks, are there a lot of crowds in the Adriatic these days? And if so, any tips on how people can avoid them?
So in the sort of a summer season, yeah, could be quite crowded. But as I said, most of the crowds come from the cruise ships. And so if you avoid cruise ships time, then your experience will already be quite different. Also try to combine. Go to some of the bigger cities, but then find some of the beautiful islands. There are 1,000 islands, so you will for sure find some. And then you can actually make a combination and make your the stay here much more enjoyable. Yeah.
That's also,
yeah, also, sorry, also time-wise, of course, in April or in end of October is much less crowded than July, August, that it's quite crowded, yeah.
Donald is curious. He says, is it true that people in the Czech Republic prefer to be called Czech or Czechia?
I'll take this one because we don't have any Czechs here. You might have heard in the news, the parliament a few years ago of the Czech Republic said, well, we're officially going to accept Czechia, Czechia, as another official name for our country. But it's kind of interesting. I wouldn't say that Czech people prefer that. In fact, I've asked some Czech friends about it, and they say, well, that was kind of a governmental thing, and they're trying to make it simpler because Czech Republic sounds complicated. But they're a little annoyed because to a casual ear, Czechia sounds like Chechnya. And so the Czechs have this wonderful, ironic, sort of sarcastic sense of humor. And they're like, of course, you're trying to make our country sound more appealing and more accessible. And then you give it a name that sounds like a place that a lot of people are intimidated by. And so from just a branding perspective, the Czechs are kind of irritated about it. So I would say it's a formal, official, optional name for the Czech Republic, Czechia, but it's not something that is widely embraced by the locals. You know what local people call the Czech, their country? They call it the Czech lands. And that's something that hasn't crossed over into English. But all of my Czech friends, they talk about the Czech lands because there's actually multiple regions that make up the Czech Republic. And I love that. I think it's very poetic. It doesn't fit on a bumper sticker, but I describe these areas as the Czech lands.
David wrote us, Cameron has said that it's important to travel to places where we disagree with politics so that we can connect with the people and learn their perspectives. How can American travelers have respectful conversations about politics with Europeans they may disagree with?
I think I'll take the first stab at this, but I'd be curious to hear from our guests as well. I mean, I think it's always important to try to, I think an important part of travel is empathy. Anytime you travel somewhere, you should be trying to put yourself in the shoes of the people who live there. That's why we invite our European friends to join us for these Festival of Europe, because you don't need me telling you my American perspective the whole time. We want to hear it from them personally. So for me, I think a really important part of traveling is just getting to know the locals, trying to understand it from their point of view. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that they're doing or that their politicians are doing. But I think it can really enhance understanding, and you make people-to-people contacts. I also think it helps kind of demystify if you disagree with somebody politically and you actually get to know them, you might realize, okay, from their point of view, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I don't have to agree with it, but it humanizes them. It's very easy to demonize people who disagree with you politically. And I think travel does the opposite. So I see a lot of value in that. Do you as people who travel with busloads of Americans all year long, some of which may or may not agree with the politics of the places you go, Péter and Darija, do you have any thoughts about that?
As for me, you already said one thing, that politics and people are different things. And I think it's very important to learn, because you hear the news, which is mostly politics, that the prime minister did that and the prime minister did, something else. And then you go there and you suddenly realize that people have different opinions, even about their own prime minister. So that's one very important story to learn. And the second thing is, yes, we'd love to put you out of your comfort zone. Yes, communism is a great topic. Communism is a swear word in the United States, but actually we still have 3 years of maternity leave because of communism. If you, if you want to have a baby, come to Hungary, because we have got 3 years of paid maternity leave. And it's just nice to put these things out there and and talk about it. Maybe you're gonna take something very precious home from these conversations. Travel with me, and I'll give you an opportunity to talk to me and disagree with me.
I think we're all getting at the same idea, which is people are not monolithic. And when you're doing a quick take like this and you're writing a guidebook or leading a tour, you're like, well, Czechs are like this and Hungarians are like this. But the beauty and the joy of traveling is you realize that just because you see in the headlines, this country believes this, when you actually go and talk to the people on the street, you realize no population is monolithic. There's so much nuance and variety and diversity in the way people think about things. And that's something you really learn by traveling and meeting people in person like you can in no other way.
Exactly. And if I may say, I usually warn people that when they travel to this region, if they start talking about politics, about the war, about the politic or other countries, American politics, they just need to be ready that the locals are not very politically correct. So what they think, they will tell them. So you have to be ready for that. So don't ask questions if you are not ready to hear the honest answers. So that's how it goes here. Yeah.
Very well said.
Yes, wonderful points. I'm going to ask a two-part question. We've heard this asked by multiple people. Has the war in Ukraine impacted travel in Central Europe? And are there any ways for travelers going to the region to help Ukrainian refugees who are there now?
I'll just quickly. I think I'd love our guests to maybe answer the second part if they can think about that in their own communities. I'll just say from the company's point of view, when the war broke out, it was literally 2 or 3 months before we did the first of those Poland tours, and Poland shares a border with Ukraine. And a lot of people were very concerned, and we really knew from talking with our Polish contacts and understanding what was happening on the ground, what's going on in Ukraine is a crisis and a tragedy. And it even if it's sending a lot of refugees through Poland and other countries, we kept asking people, is it still safe and is it still reasonable and is it still responsible and is it still ethical for us to bring travelers there? And everyone we talked to said absolutely. In fact, our tourism industry was kind of struggling. A lot of these countries were waiting for the big rebound post-COVID, and then with the invasion of Ukraine, suddenly all the people who were scared off by COVID are scared off by Ukraine, and people who were waiting for 2 years to recover had to wait another year or two. And the reality on the ground, I will say, I was part of the team that led that first tour in Poland in May of 2022. And I've been back to these countries several times since. From a traveler's perspective, in terms of safety, feeling safe, being safe, worrying about your well-being, I think it's really a non-issue. I think it's become clear that these places are very safe and stable to travel in, while also being mindful of and empathetic with what's going on in Ukraine. As far as how travelers can help, I'm curious, Péter or Darija, do you have any thoughts about that?
Just a very distant thought. I think the best you can do is travel and not stay at home, and travel and learn about the reality, because there are so many different stories out there about what's going on in the Ukraine right now, and so many different perspectives, and you tend to forget and then get tired of this whole issue. But I think it's extremely important to learn what's going on, maybe on both sides, yes, of course, and to hear it from someone. Let's say Poland has got 5 million refugees. You will not see them out on the street. They don't live in camps because they work over there. But you have a chance to talk to someone, and suddenly, a story comes to life because you meet someone who lived on the other side of the border, let's say a couple of months before that. So the best you can do is don't be scared, travel, come here, learn about it. And obviously, if you want to donate, you can. On the main square of Kraków, Ukrainians are there at the end of each day. They sing the Ukrainian national anthem, and you can donate your money if you want to. So these are two ways of helping Ukraine. But the other options are available as well. But I guess that's just slightly more complicated. So travel and don't stay at home.
Yeah, I would say that no big difference in helping from the States than from here. So it's you can help from home the same way and do the things that Péter said. Yes, you can also try to learn about it. And then if you are ready to donate, you can do that from home as well. Yeah.
If you'll allow me, I'd like to just tell a beautiful story about this. On that first Poland tour, we were staying at a hotel in Warsaw, run by a gentleman who we've had in our books for years. He's a friend of ours, and he's very conscientious about employing people from Ukraine. In fact, a lot of his staff were recent arrivals from Ukraine. And we had a dinner planned at a restaurant up the street that was kind of a conventional Polish dinner. And so we kind of put our heads together with our guide team and with Jacek, who runs the hotel. And we noticed that his kitchen staff was all Ukrainian. And we said, you know, we can get Polish food anywhere. We would be very honored if they would want to cook, your Ukrainian staff would want to cook us their food. And it turned out to be an absolutely beautiful moment because they were so excited. They came to Poland. They had to get a job in a restaurant. Everyone wants Polish food, so they're cooking Polish food. To be asked to cook their own food, and for our tour members to have the experience of having a home-cooked Ukrainian meal from somebody who just arrived from Ukraine a few months earlier, it was just one of those beautiful moments of travel synergy. And it's funny. Maybe this is naive, but I like to think that was a win-win-win, right? Jacek is employing people from Ukraine. They're getting a safe refuge from a terrible situation. We're supporting them financially by traveling and paying them to cook us their food. They feel wonderful about the honor of being asked to cook their food for us. We felt honored that they would cook their food for us. I think travel, if you do it thoughtfully and respectfully and responsibly, can create really beautiful moments, even in times of trial.
That's a wonderful story, Cameron. And when I was doing guidebook research in Tallinn, I found that many of the hotels in Tallinn are employing Ukrainian refugees, and there was a Ukrainian market on the main square while I was there. So I certainly, I found that the situation is similar to what you described. Now, your mention of food is a good pivot to the final question from Harry. He wrote to us, "The food in Central Europe looks incredible. Could each of you describe your favorite dish from your country?"
Peter, I'll let you go first because you have a lot of good choices in Hungary.
We do. I will go with langos, the third thing that I mentioned, because not a lot of people know about it. And I love it for a variety of reasons. I think it tells a lot about the culture, what people eat out on the beach, for example. We drink a Coke and a cocktail, but then at the same time, we would go to this place that sells this deep fried dough, like a giant elephant ear. And if you eat the whole thing, it's so heavy, it's gonna stay with you forever. I'm just joking over here right now. So it's a wonderful experience. These days I eat once a year because I just cannot take it more than that. But if you put sour cream and cheese and a pinch of garlic on top, and you wash it down with a pint of beer, it's a beautiful experience. So something unexpected because the rest you may know. But if you come to Hungary, try langos.
Okay, so in Zagreb, we eat sort of this Central European food. So we are not much into the Mediterranean cuisine. We are aware that it's very healthy, but we are not a big fish eaters, to tell you the truth. So our main traditional dish is turkey with mlinci, which mlinci being a type of noodles. And we also eat sausages and sauerkraut and potatoes and goulash and pancakes and strudels. So these kind of things. But my favorite is actually a traditional dish, but with the Turkish influence. It's sarma. Those are the pickled cabbage meat rolls. So the pickled cabbage filled with a combination of ground meat and the rice, and then cooked for a couple of hours with some dry meat. So it's not a light dish, but it's a very popular winter dish. You should eat it also with mashed potatoes. So
I'll just give a very quick answer. I think, Ben, this might be your favorite too. As usual, I'll advocate for Poland and borscht. It's very simple. It's a savory beetroot soup. usually a pretty thin broth. And when you're traveling Poland a lot, you become kind of a borscht, or barszcz, they call it in Polish, aficionado. I find my way to getting a bowl or a cup of borscht at least once a day when I'm in Poland, and they're all a little bit different, a little bit delicious. And Ben, you made me your recipe for borscht, I remember a few years ago, and it was absolutely delicious. So that's a very simple dish, always delicious.
Excellent. Oh my goodness. Well, Cameron, it means a lot to me that you praise my borscht. Thank you. And that was the last question, Cameron. So I'll let you have the final word.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, as I mentioned, I've been traveling and writing about and guiding in these countries for 20 plus years, and I'm no less passionate now than I was then. I think this is a wonderful corner of Europe, whether you're interested in going on a tour, whether you're doing it on your own, whether you're just dreaming. This is just a wonderful little slice of Europe, very underappreciated, a lot more interesting and diverse and complex and layered than you might think at first glance. And it's really a privilege to be able to share this with all of you. And I want to say a special thank you to our guests, Péter from Budapest and Darija from Zagreb. It's been wonderful having your insights, and I look forward to hopefully bumping into you both. There's always a good chance I'll bump into you somewhere on the road this year. So hopefully I'll see you soon.
Thank you for calling, for actually inviting us.
Thank you for getting up so
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Good night, Cameron. Good night, Darija. Good night, Péter.
Good night, Ben. Good night, Darija and Péter.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Ben. Good night, Cameron.